Hello everyone, this is Defense Politics Asia, and this is the operational report for the Russians' operation in their special military operation in Ukraine. And so the Russian forces is on the back foot, largely with the Ukrainians continuing their summer offensive. It's no longer a spring, it's summer offensive, but the Russians do continue with limited offensive of their own. The main offensive that they are going on with is actually at Marinka, with the forces continue to attack within Marinka itself. They are also fighting within on the southwestern part of Marinka at Boyeda. And this Boyeda is actually pretty problematic for the Russians because they actually ever captured Boyeda, but due to Ukrainian artillery, they have to evacuate, and Ukrainians actually recapture the town. So it's not so simple to capture this town. The battle is not really for the village, but actually for the entire area around this area. And the Russians also continue to attack towards Novo-Mikhailivka, south of Marinka, and this is the main offensive, one of the main offensive that the Russians are currently operating. There's another one which is a bit let's go to the other main one first. The other main one is actually over here at the Crimea front, and within the Serebryansky forestry. And so this Serebranka, which is where the name come from, or Seversky Donetsk. So this is Serebryansky forestry, and the Russian forces continuing their push within the forest as they slowly clear out Ukrainian strongholds within this forest. The Ukrainians have a lot of entrenchment within this forest, so the progress is very slow, but the Ukrainians are suffering probably heavy losses as the Russians are using heavy artillery, flamethrower systems, and airstrikes on Ukrainian forces as long as they find them. So the situation is not very good for the Ukrainians, with the Russians overwhelming them slowly. There are also some limited fighting over at Bilohorivka, which is kind of unclear who is actually on the real offensive over here, as there is contradicting reports around this area here. So this is part of the Crimea front, and there's the other push is actually over at Adievka front. So this Adievka city, this is actually the fortress city of Adievka, and Russian forces, allegedly by pro-Ukrainian sources, saying that the Russians are actually pushing from Kruta Balka region, Kayamka, all the way to Krasnohorivka region. However, this is kind of unclear because we do have information previously that the Ukrainians are attacking in this area here, and in fact the Ukrainians are still attacking Vasily. So the fact that the Ukrainians are actually on the offensive over at the Vasily region makes me question how the Russians are able to fight across the entire front line around here. It's not that it's not possible, just that I thought that it might be more makes sense that the Russians would actually reinforce Vasily to try to push back the Ukrainians and recapture lost ground. So we will continue to watch this place. Adievka front is a very tricky because both sides are trying to do offensive previously, and then the Ukrainians pretty much overwhelmed the Russians in terms of the offensive. The Ukrainians mainly the one that are attacking. They're attacking over on the western part of Krasnohorivka at Vasily. There was also information that they are fighting on the eastern part towards Kruta Balka, and the Ukrainians also successfully attacked north of Vodian, and they are also pushing at Pervomaiske. So then we have random information sometimes over the past week that the Russians attacking at Pervomaiske. Suddenly there is some fighting over at Ternenke, but they say that it's the Ukrainians they are attacking, and then suddenly we have a fighting around Krasnohorivka region. There's this push, so it's very very random. It's very schizophrenic. I don't know what's the word. I forgot how to pronounce that word. Schizophrenic. Yeah, something like yeah. So it's a bit confusing. So we'll continue to monitor, but the Russians, the offensive over the Adievka front is very suspect. It doesn't feel like sustained kind of offensive, like in Marinka region or at the Serebransky Forestry. Otherwise, the Russians are not exactly attacking in Bakhmut, despite the Ukrainian Defense Ministry consistently reported that the Russians are attacking over the Bakhmut front and over at the southern part of Siversk front. This is Bakhmut. It feels like it doesn't feel legitimate, because even pro-Ukrainian sources are saying that the Ukrainians are on the offensive. So the Russians' focus currently is still on the holding the lines that the Wagner forces have managed to capture. However, the prime target for the Ukrainians are the Yakovlivka, Berkivka, and then the Zeleniansky, Klishevka, Kuryomivka. These are all the prime targets by the Ukrainians, and it basically almost all of them are under threat by the Ukrainians. So the Russians are basically just trying their best to hold these lines as much as they can, with no clear indication of what the Russians are going to do about do they are going to do a counter-offensive or whatnot. It doesn't look likely. It doesn't look like it. It looks like they are just going to absorb the attack, and the Ukrainians are continuing their offensive over this region. One of the uncomfortable place for the Russians is actually at the Velika Novoselka sector, where the Ukrainians are making most of their biggest push, and the Russians actually withdraw over from the south of Novodarivka and Rivnopil, as they are unable to hold this position, and previously they also withdraw from the western part of Makarivka. So they line up straighten the lines from Staromayovsky to the north of Prione. This is Staromayovsky, this is Prione, and the operation for the Russians over at this region is continue to just, you can call it attritional warfare. They are just here to delay the offensive and incur as much damage on the Ukrainians as much as they can. It's not really an offensive operation, but so far the Ukrainians are ramping up their assault has been successful to pushing back the Russians that previously in the earlier part of the offensive, the Ukrainians took a lot of losses, but it's working now, especially considering that the previous front line was at Vremivka. The Russians the lines was actually this far. This is the amount of Ukrainian progress since the start of the Ukrainian offensive. This is the amount of capture that the Ukrainians have done. So it's not trivial. If the Russians have done this, I think the pro-Russian crowd will be actually very, very excited as well. So do not underestimate the Ukrainian offensive. Is actually doing decently well for this amount of space over the past month. And another one of the vexing place is actually south of Orekiv. The Russians are holding the line around here with Robotini, because north of Robotini there isn't any heavy entrenchment. The entrenchment is actually just around Robotini. So let me zoom in a bit, so it's a bit better to see. So there's two main entrenchment around here, and then there is the main defense line along Robotini, and the Ukrainians are literally pushing between the two entrenchment, and then there's another force from the south of Malatomashka pushing towards this entrenchment. The danger of for the Ukrainians is that if they continue to push Robotini, the Russians may actually launch an offensive and actually encircle them. But so far, not yet. The Russians are still, trying to hold the line around 1.5 kilometers north of Robotini as the Ukrainians continue to make this push towards Robotini. But if they reach Robotini, it's going to be one hell of a difficult, because you can see how heavy the entrenchment around Robotini is. So I hope the Ukrainians have a plan to deal with all these things, but the Russians are basically just absorbing the attack, as I mentioned previously. And one of the last area I want to talk about is actually at the Antonovsky Bridge. The Ukrainians have this bridgehead over at Dachi, and the Russian forces, the commander in this area here feels really vexed. The Russian commander is very vexed about the Ukrainians bridgehead over at Dachi, and they have been trying to attack Dachi. And this caused severe losses in Russian lives and equipments for no good reason, according to pro-Russian sources, saying that, you know, this is kind of stupid. And yeah, so there is, depends on how you look at it. The Russians may not actually have a need to actually push and recapture Dachi entirely. They could actually just hold the line and just bombard any Ukrainian reinforcement and try to, you know, attrition out these Ukrainian forces into a withdrawal. Because for the Ukrainians to actually push out, it's also very difficult, you know. But then instead, the Russian went to push in, and they actually exposed themselves, and a lot of losses is caused as a result. So this area is vexing to the commander, the local commander. But generally, in the macro sense, this capture is not significant enough, because this is basically a choke point. So, but the fighting is still ongoing. The Ukrainians are definitely very determined to hold this position. Otherwise, the Russians do not really have any operations over at the Svatove and Kupiansk region. It seems like they are very happy with whatever front line that they currently have. So yeah, nothing is happening really over these fronts. It went really quiet. So anyway, this is the operational report for the Russians operations, and I need you guys to press the subscribe button. If all of you who are not subscribed, which is around almost 50% of you, all press subscribe button at the same time, DPA will just be 3 days away from going to 100,000 subs. That's the impact you guys can do for DPA. So press the subscribe button, support DPA's aim to reach the 100,000 subs. And thank you in advance, and I'll see you in the next update.